is the Senate File 51 that we laid back on Friday. We have, the thought was that we needed to put a sunset date in. We had the amendments drawn 3 different ways, and just to keep it simple, I numbered them 1, 2, and 3. Just handwritten number at the top of the bill. And are there copies for the audience?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there's copies for the audience.
Where are they? Did they get passed out, or are they
They're out on the desk when they signed in.
outside? So
Yes.
there are copies out there. The number 1 version, there was thought that, well, we'll just make it an uncodified section that expires. That's what this does. That's perhaps the mildest. But you get rid of the whole text, essentially rewrite the whole bill, get rid of the whole text and have a section 1 that just is specifically limited to school years 23, 24, 24, 25, and 23, 26. And then the whole thing goes away. That's that option. Option 2 is a different approach. It does the same thing as option 1, but what it does is it goes into the text in the statute and puts in the specific school years, and then goes back to the original language as I read the page 4, line 2 insertion. So that's the second option. The third option, frankly, it looks like much more like the traditional sunset that we put in bills. We're going to do it puts the language in properly with the greater of the ways of doing it. And then it says the subdivision is repealed July 1, 2026. And when you trace through what it means by subdivision, the subdivision starts on page 1, line 24. It's the regional cost adjustment. And that, frankly, I favor that because I think it will cause the whole subject matter to be looked at in context of the regional cost adjustment. And I think that's valuable. And it really forces its appearance in a recodification bill where we'll hash it out and get a long-term compromise that we can all live with. And I think this is a chronic problem that's not going to go away and may spread to 1 or 2 other communities before we're done. So those are the 3 options. Discussion on all 3, and then I will move number 3 unless you all persuade me otherwise. Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate having the options and having the opportunity to consider these. As I mentioned when we were chatting a little bit before the meeting, have concerns with for me, option 1 is the best because it is very narrow and does what we wanted it to do. Option 2 is just the same as option 1, but in the green books, which I don't know why we would do option 2, honestly. It seems like that one's the least attractive is option 2. The concern I have with option 3, and I understand the idea of putting forward an impetus and trying to get us to focus on the RCA, which is important, but the RCA is required by the Campbell decisions. So we cannot have a constitutional funding model without an RCA present. Option 3 would potentially repeal the RCA. So that is bigger than anything that the bill intended to do in the beginning. And in my view, it really does have concerns of constitutionality of moving outside of the bill, because we go from contemplating a small change in the way the cost of living index is calculated for the RCI, what was a tiny bill in the beginning, to a bill now which is probably then the most significant education bill in the legislature, because it has the potential to repeal the entirety of the regional cost adjustment, which is a $50, $75 million change that makes it unconstitutional. My inclination, and honestly, at that point, I not only am I not enthused about the amendment at that point, but I don't know that I could support the bill at that point. I think it would probably just lead to the bill dying in the House. I could be wrong, but that would be my expectation of the outcome. The first one's just a simple fix of a simple bill that achieves the objective that was laid out. So I would much prefer option number 1, which achieves the objective that the committee laid out on Friday.
Okay, further discussion? Let me respond to that. I think we're much better off with a clear sunset here that forces another look. I have a couple of concerns. One of them is that the adjustment we've got is not adequate to solve the problem. It'll help. It'll be a Band-Aid to get us through the next few years. But that problem in those communities, and I suspect 1 or 2 of our other resort communities, is not going away and is gradually getting worse. So I think we really need it. And I think it needs to be discussed in terms of it's a modification to the regional cost adjustment. And I think the whole regional cost adjustment needs to be carefully considered. And I think that's well within the scope of the bill. That's what a classic sunset date does, is it forces you to relook at the thing and forces to try to reach a compromise on that. And I think that's all to the good, because we've got a problem that just is not going away. And I was concerned. I tend to answer my emails on Sunday and came in and was surprised by the magnitude of the campaign against this bill. On the grounds the schools were overfunded was the argument that I was seeing in many of them. And this was just a future building escalator. And I think that is a matter of serious concern. We get that kind of a campaign against a bill, and I think the thing is needed. So I don't pretend as to know what the House is going to do. Give them something, and we may have to compromise on it. But I think they'll recognize the concern that really is in those 2 communities, particularly Teton County. So but committee, it's your choice.
Mr. Chairman, quick response.
Okay.
So I definitely agree that the RCA has massive flaws, and we could spend quite a while and walk through all of those flaws. In all 3 of the recalibrations that I worked with, and a couple of other times, honestly, over the years, we've tried to address the regional cost adjustment and failed. And so I wish, and honestly, I think we had solutions, but I think I mentioned before that those solutions tended to cost $30 million or something like that to actually get to the point where there was a resolution to the RCA that everybody was comfortable with. And part of that has to do, again, with the way the the Campbell decisions were drafted, that you can't have a district go below the 1.0, so it requires a mathematical rebasing, and that costs more money, and a lot of challenges to it. So to me, I'm happy, for example, to have the RCA be an interim topic and for us to spend countless hours working on it until we get it right. I think there are solutions out there. But using this little bill as the vehicle to force that, again, I just don't think it's consistent with what this bill was intended to do, which was a minor tweak. And the RCA discussion is a huge debate that typically fills the room when you're actually contemplating changing it. So again, I'd caution to go with the full sunset and think that if we want to pass this bill, we should do it narrowly as consistent with the bill so that we're constitutionally compliant with our requirement to work within the bill title. And if we are concerned that we're hearing too much against the bill, honestly, passing this bill is not that big of a deal. It helps a couple of districts that asked us for it during the interim. But as I said, I'd worry much more about passing a bill that was a sunset of the entire RCA. That would then be a bill that I'd be very concerned about, as opposed to this little bill, which you may or may not like.
At this point, we've introduced the sunsets, new concept we didn't have when we heard testimony on Friday, so I'm going to throw it open. State Department or anybody else wants to testify on this, they're welcome to. Anybody want to testify on this? I see, no. Teton County, Slesky.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee. I just would like to clean up. I left early on Friday morning to get to appropriations, and there was a question asked about whether what the breakdown was of the employees that had resigned last year. I mentioned that we had 60 resignations. 41 of those were certified staff or teachers, and 19 of them were classified staff.
Let me ask, how many teachers do you have total? So it's 41 out of how many?
We have 374 certified teachers. That does not include special ed, which is a reimbursable category, so this does not apply to that.
41 out of that's 12, 13% turnover in a single year.
And Mr. Chair, I really appreciate that the committee took on the challenge of talking about teacher retention and attraction, because I think part of what we see happening is that, it's so expensive to live there. I can take my teaching license and I can go someplace else, make pretty good money with my experience, and not have to deal with the, extreme cost of housing.
Questions? Thank you very much. Okay, anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on these, and thank you for sharing the amendments. I guess if I had a preference, I like number 2 the best. Now you've got 1, 2, and 3 all on the table. The reason I like number 2 is its transparency. It does keep it in the books where people can see it. It does have sort of the simple clause. I do think that the concerning part about number 3 is that last sentence. This subdivision is repealed. And I think that the repealer of this sort of unique approach to RCA is appropriate. But a repealer of the RCA altogether potentially does run into other unanticipated issues. It is clear the RCA needs work and the RCA should be fixed. But again, I think 2 is the simple fix to a simple bill. It's transparent, people see it. Any of these that you adopt, I think, could be helpful, so I appreciate your consideration of them.
Any questions? Thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. I'll be brief. I'd like to echo the sentiments of Brian Farmer. We would support the second proposed amendment. We would definitely, we voiced the same concerns Senator Rothfuss and Mr. Farmer echoed on the third amendment. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Seeing none, thank you very much. Anybody else? Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, that'll close the public testimony. I'll move option number 3, put that on the table. You've heard my comments. Anybody, anything further? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
4 to 1, that carried. Anything further on the bill? Anything further on the bill? Do I hear a motion? Motion is due pass as amendment. Anything further? Call the roll, please.
Senator Beitman? Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss?
No.
Senator Steinmetz? Chairman Scott?
Aye.
4 ayes, 1 no.
Okay, that took care of that one. The next one we've got is the Senate File 83, K2 facility leasing. Senator Rothfuss, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Senate File 83 is kind of a cleanup concept. The history there is about 5 years ago, we changed the way that we do leasing of school facilities. It was a little bit complicated, and we didn't have a market provision to make sure that we were paying fair rates. That came up in a circumstance related to a couple of Cheyenne charter schools at the time. So through the School Facilities Committee, we put forward some legislation to tweak the way that that was done and create a circumstance where the lease rates had to be comparable to the appropriate for the region, and then established it such that it would include all of the routine maintenance, the major maintenance, and everything else would be bundled together in a fee, and then that would be handed over to the lessee, to that entity that's leasing the facility. So that seemed like a good idea at the time. And the reality is, since that point, the concern was raised with a charter school that struggled because they couldn't get major maintenance done. They didn't really have any authority in the contract and the way things were structured such that they could say, hey, we want to make sure that you fix the roof, or hey, we want to make sure you fix the boiler. We paid you all the money for major maintenance. The money was already paid. There wasn't a lot of opportunity to have that conversation because the money was already paid as an integral part of the lease. So in talking with other colleagues on the School Facilities Committee about this concern, and with our LSO, we came up with this simple little addition that you see. The only change to that existing procedure is on page 3. So you have an insertion of a partial paragraph. And the intent here is to basically, even though it's a part of the contract, set aside the major maintenance portion of a lease agreement, and whether that's a charter school that's leasing the facility or the school district that's leasing the facility, have the major maintenance in a set-aside pool of funds so that it can only be used for major maintenance projects as approved by whatever that governing board is. So if it's a charter school, it would be the charter school board approving major maintenance projects in cooperation with the owner of the facility or the board of trustees of the school district, if it's the board of trustees that has oversight to it. And you see that's the key language on line 9, beginning there. No expenditure shall be made from the funds dedicated for major maintenance of a leased facility without the approval of the district or the charter school. Hopefully this should remedy the concern that has been raised where there isn't any authority to withhold those funds if the work's not getting done through the pre-approval process. So that's the impetus of the bill, and pretty simple and straightforward. It actually allows that still to be negotiated in the contract, which portion of the total ends up going to major maintenance, but at least it provides a mechanism then for whatever that governing board is to ensure that the owner of the facility is operating in a way that's consistent with the best interests of the students.
Answer. Let me ask a couple. And let me say, part of the basis for my questions is that we've got a charter school in process in Casper. The facility it's going to use is the old Mills School, and the history there was that that school was abandoned by the school district, and they sold it to the town of Mills, city of Mills, for, I think, a nominal fee. It was in use at the time, but the schools, our capital construction built a new school somewhere that covers Mills, and so it's been sitting vacant. And the city very much wants to have a school in the town, so they're leasing it on a nominal basis to the charter school, which is going to come in and use it. And the arrangements have been made for, there's a certain amount of catch up when you've had a building that's sat idle for a while. So the first question I've got, is it going to work for a circumstance like that, where your landlord is a city and is presumably pretty well motivated to keep the school in good shape?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. I think for folks that would be doing the right thing anyway, it's going to work very well. There shouldn't be any change. And I think it's probably already been working fine in most circumstances. Just one circumstance, it worked very poorly. With regard to the situation that you're discussing, even if it's a zero fee lease, I would expect that the city of Mills would want the major maintenance funding that comes from the state to support a school facility. So it's my anticipation then that that contract would basically call out, all right, well, maybe we'll charge you zero for the actual use fee, but we do want the routine maintenance, which comes through the block grant. And there's going to be then a model generated amount for routine maintenance. And then we'd end up with an estimate of what the major maintenance is based on comparable schools. And so you'd negotiate the contract with the school facilities department for a lease that is that amount, and then you just set aside kind of the contribution if Mills wants to for whatever that discount is going to be for the actual traditional lease payment. So the major maintenance would come through, and then it would be agreements between in that case, the charter school board would have effectively approval authority through the contract for major maintenance projects, and would have to sign off on that a project is consistent with their educational mission before the funds would be released. But that's it.
Second question I've got is, these are annual leases. They may be longer term, but their funding is on an annual basis. And I think of major maintenance as something you don't do every year, but you have a large project that needs doing. Say the boiler needs to be replaced or the roof needs to be replaced. You do 1 year, you'll do the whole roof. And the next 2 or 3 years, you may do nothing. And 1 year's major maintenance, if it comes in any kind of formula, might not be sufficient to do a major project. Is there a provision for carrying it over? How does that work?
And Mr. Chairman, that was a discussion that I had when I was working with Tanya and Matt to draft this, was to ensure that it would be consistent with other major maintenance funding such that it can be carried over without penalty, but only usable for that purpose. So you basically have a fund set up. That fund
So you
can,
might have to accumulate it for a couple of years
Absolutely.
before you could replace it.
because that is definitely how major maintenance is supposed to work when working correctly. And that's actually one of the concerns for the current system also. There's no obligation for any carryover for the owner of the building. So when the roof breaks, move out or something. I don't really know.
But, so we do have a problem with the whole system on this sort of thing. Okay. Senator Steinmetz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So please humor me, I'm new to this committee. I'm trying to understand how this works. So a leased building that we're leasing for educational purposes, if the roof goes bad, the state is paying to replace the roof? No.
So that was one of the provisions, and that was one of the reasons why we changed it a few years ago through school facilities, is we really didn't want to be on the hook for anything, and we wanted I think they call it a triple net lease, where basically everything's included, right? All the bells and whistles. And it seemed like a good idea, so the state wouldn't be on the hook. And really, I think in general, it was a good policy decision, except for this fact that we had no mechanism then to ensure that the funds actually were to keep up the roof. And as it turns out, right, it's not like we have 35 commercial spaces available where schools can pop back and forth based on the costs and are you giving me a good rate and is it a nice building? So you end up being a captive effectively. Once you've moved a school into a building, they have you. And so what happens is then it's very easy to just kind of pocket the money and spend it where else you want. You don't have to create your own funds or set aside for the major maintenance side. Routine maintenance can be a little bit of a problem also that isn't addressed in this bill, but in theory, the contract should be able to figure out how, are you responsible for shoveling the walks? Am I responsible for mowing the lawn? How is that going to work out? We pay for all of that through the school foundation program model. So we include all of that in the lease payment too and build this lease payment. When we made that change, we just about doubled the amount we were paying 5 years ago for the lease to get the state off the hook for everything and to have it unified. But we need to make sure then that we have the capacity to ensure that the school roof is getting saved up for and replaced, and that when you have that conversation with the building and or you say, the boiler's going down, you need to invest, I paid you for this, invest in it, that you can enforce that, and that's what we saw a failure in. So the dollars don't change in any way, but giving a little oversight capacity for the governing board is all this does. Does that help, Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow up. Yes, it does help. It just is a little bit different than how the private sector works in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And very interesting concept to me, so thank you.
So one difference there, Mr. Chairman, one of the ways the private sector works, though, is really the capacity to move around, typically, as well as the capacity to bring a lawsuit for enforcement of the contract. And that really was something which was a possible opportunity. But the strange little bit is enforcing the contract gets back to state law and rules and regulations through the school facilities department for adequacy standards for buildings, and has all sorts of other little features that the private sector doesn't have. So we talked about just adding some more draconian provisions and having the school facilities department file lawsuits and things like that. That was another consideration, which just honestly didn't sound very appealing as the mechanism. Let's file more lawsuits didn't seem like the best path. The major maintenance funds are theoretically for major maintenance purposes. We use them for all buildings, and they are to keep the adequacy of the building so that they're appropriate for students. This just makes sure that that conversation is where we have it everywhere else. And again, when I mentally walked through this legislation as a building owner, you're kind of getting paid more than you probably would otherwise get paid with a system like this. If you just pocket the money and deprecate the building and walk away from it, that's a reasonable strategy potentially as the landowner when you're being overpaid. But that's not what we want as the state, right? We want every student that goes in that building to have a good experience. At the same time, if you actually use the major maintenance for the upkeep of the building and invest in the building, then you're investing in appreciating assets. So you're still coming out ahead. It's just this sort of tilts the scale towards that side of, all right, invest in the asset, because that's what the school children need you to do, where that regrettably isn't apparently always the decision that the owner makes. It's a bit of a challenge.
I will say, I've seen several models used in Casper area that mentioned where we're using an old school that really isn't suitable for much of anything else. I also saw them put a school of choice into what had been a buffet-style restaurant. And they made that work, but they went away from it after several years, and I wonder if it was because the building owners weren't keeping it up or not. And that you might want to walk away from. So the school districts can do that either way.
In Casper, it's a little easier than elsewhere because you do have a pretty decent number of large retail spaces at any given time that could potentially be moved into. It is a tremendous cost to move a school, though. I mean, once you open it up and you have to reestablish it to safety standards that are appropriate for children, and then move all of your stuff in there and rebuild it. We have one of our charter schools is in the old Walmart in Laramie. And what ended up happening, actually, the state ended up buying the building from Walmart Corporation. That was probably 8 years ago or something like that, 9 years ago, because it was far less costly. And now I think the state leases out half the building or something like that, and the other half is for the charter school. So it ended up probably being a real successful venture economically. But it's a challenge when you don't have open space, and the other school that experienced this in Laramie had no alternatives. I worked with them to explore every other site in the city where we could put a school. We were a captive. There was no other site in Laramie at the time that the school could move to, instead of maintaining the lease. And so they signed an extension of the lease basically as a hostage. Now things have gotten better a little bit, but this is the concern that was raised, and there was really no remedy available for the school to withhold funding or anything along those lines. And to the extent that, again, the charter school board that was going through this experience really doesn't want to be litigious. They don't want to spend their time filing lawsuits. We, the state, structured the terms of the contract, so they can't do a different kind of contract, which you can also do in industry, right? You can say, we don't want to do net and net. We're going to take over the maintenance. No, we said you can't do that. State says you will include major maintenance. You will include routine maintenance. You'll include everything into it. It will be this price. So the state has already negotiated the lease on behalf of the charter school or the school district without them basically being involved in the pricing.
Okay. No. Anybody here present, State Department, do you want to testify in this bill? Anybody else? Anybody else? Seeing none. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move bill.
Motion is due pass, no amendments. Further discussion? Further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Senator Brennan.
Aye.
Senator, oops, I have the wrong one. So, I got the wrong sheet. Senator Beitman? Aye. Senator Steinmetz?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss? Aye. Chairman Scott?
Aye. And 5 ayes. Be warned, as per the discussion this morning, you might see it on the general file in a hurry.
Exactly. I think it might be this afternoon. Seems like
Okay. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 84. Senators Ellis, Beitman, Brennan is one of the committee members. It's a co-sponsor. Or who's going to carry that? There's Senator Ellis. You were right into the reflection from the sun. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you today Senate File 84. And every now and again on the internet, you see funny little memes, and I keep seeing the word perseverance pop up in mine. And so as much as I cannot believe I'm back here talking about absenteeism, we still have some more work to do. As you know, for new members of this committee, this Joint Education Committee has looked extensively at how we can improve our absenteeism statutes. And so we've done some work over the years to make sure that they all tie together with our Title 14, you know, how we deal with tardiness and, you know, who's at fault of the absence, is it the student or parent? But what's become unfortunately evident to me is our school districts are still lagging behind in catching up with making some changes to their policy. For example, this fall, I had the opportunity to attend a conference. I had frequent flyer miles that would expire by the end of the year. So instead of letting those go to waste, I decided to take my family. I arranged for them some national park tours and some other educational opportunities, called their school districts a month in advance to try and make arrangements, and was told, nope, those will not be excused. So again, looking at my district's policy, the only things that they consider to be excused are those that involve the student's health, injury, other emergencies beyond parental control. Those include death or serious illness in the family. But they say that activities that are not beyond parental control are hunting and vacations. And so, Mr. Chairman, I've given this a lot of thought. I mean, certainly there are families in the hunting example that rely on that activity to provide food for their family's table. It just seems like our districts have really rigid policies. Years ago, I had approached my district about revising their policies, but that's an undertaking for a lot of districts. And so what this bill would do, Mr. Chairman, would direct the Department of Education to develop model policies related to student attendance to include definitions for unexcused absence, habitual truant, and willful absenteeism. This really is an attempt to give parents a tool after those model policies are developed to approach their school districts and request policy changes. So to be clear, this would require no district to change their policy. However, going on to page 2, there's a more serious issue that came to light, in my view, Mr. Chairman. I was approached from some individuals who live in my county, and because of some circumstances, a very serious family situation, their students had missed some class and for mental health purposes, and those absences weren't excused. And so I believe we've got people in the audience, Mr. Chairman, who can testify and provide more details about that. But again, these policies are just too rigid and don't reflect the need for students to have open communication with their school district leaders. In Laramie 1, for example, if a student has 5 or more unexcused absence in any one school year, the district attorney shall then be notified of the student's habitual truancy as required under statute. So in my case, my kids missed 5 absences. It says shall. I called the district. They said, well, we won't really refer you, we know. These policies need to be updated, Mr. Chairman, because I'm a rule follower, and when I read that, shall means shall. But you contrast that to other parts of the statute or their policy, which say school-approved activities that necessitate the absence of students have to be issued clearance slips in advance, and those are not considered unexcused. So to me, we're drawing arbitrary lines between what, if it's a school-sponsored activity versus a non-school-sponsored club sport, for example, should be really irrelevant. It should be about whether or not the student and the parents are both involved in making sure that that student doesn't fall behind. So with that, Mr. Chairman, the final parts of the bill have to do with what's required and some deadlines of when this would take effect. Under the current draft, you'll see that not later than July 1st, 2023, the state superintendent shall develop these policies. I've been in touch with the department, and if they need an extension and more time to develop those, I think that's appropriate, given the fact that we have a new superintendent in office. But the rest of it would take effect immediately, Mr. Chairman. So I would urge this committee's strong consideration to, hopefully this is the last absenteeism bill we work on for a while, but I do think it's necessary for our school districts to get a bit of a nudge to catch up with some of the changes and conversations we've had in this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Ellis, for all your work on this. Just a clarification for those that may and may not be haven't been on the committee before. So say you have a Friday. The football team's traveling 8 hours away to some other location for a football game. Then you've got a kid maybe that's on a travel hockey team that's not school sponsored. They're going to another town for a hockey game. And then another student may be going to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. with their family. The first example, that's an excused absence under current rules, and the other two are not. Is that correct?
Under my district's policy, Senator Beitman, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. State Department, any comments on this?
Good morning, Chairman Scott and the members of the committee. My name is Wanda Maloney. I'm the Chief Policy Officer at the Wyoming Department of Education. Just a couple things to bring to your attention as we look at the bill. And this would be around the time frame that Senator Ellis spoke to at the very end of the bill, as we have several bills that are moving forward in terms of the suspension and expulsion, which would require rules to be promulgated by July 1, and then also the Safe School and Climate Amendments to be promulgated by September 1. We would ask that on page 3, and this would be under section 2, line 12, no later than December 1 of 2023, that we would develop the model rules and policies. And then further down on line 17, no later than December 1, 2023, we would report to the Joint Education Committee. That would give us ample time to ensure that we have rules and policies in place, as the same team that would be moving forward some of the other rules would also be working on this. Thank you.
Can you, I didn't quite catch your name. Can you spell it for me?
Sure, Wanda, W-A-N-D-A, and the last name is Maloney, M-A-L-O-N-E-Y.
Okay, thank you. I just didn't catch the last name.
Certainly.
That's it. Okay, committee, any substantive questions? Let me ask Senator Ellis, did I understand your testimony correctly that you think this change is a good idea and needed? Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay. Tell us who your names are and who you're representing.
My name is Molly Allen, and I represent myself. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Annie Fowler, and I'm also representing myself.
Okay, go ahead, proceed.
We are sophomores at Burns Junior Whoa, sorry. Junior, senior high school, I'd like to thank you all for allowing us to speak to you today. The reason that I'm here to support this bill is that last year I experienced the loss of my brother to suicide. I watched my family grieve along with our community and especially my school. There have been 2 suicides since and many more traumatic incidents, and that is only in my school district. I have become more aware of how many students are impacted by mental health issues. I've learned that access to mental health can be challenging. This is one step that we can do to begin to address mental health in our schools. Acknowledging mental health is an issue and helping students to cope is one step towards making it easier to talk about mental health. I believe that this bill would give students the opportunity to process their feelings and issues without being penalized for missing school. Passing this bill would also allow counselors to become more aware of students that may be struggling with mental health and need assistance. As I'm sure you're all aware, our nation struggles with mental health issues. Wyoming is at the top of the list for suicides per capita. The purpose of this bill is similar to what 12 other states have already passed. I encourage Wyoming to consider passing it as well. Thank you.
Okay. Let's get both of you and then we'll call for questions.
I think it's very important that we recognize mental health. Annie Fowler. Yes, sir. Okay. I think it's really important that we recognize mental health because I've noticed that they take more consideration into physical health, which I believe that physical health is like kind of like mental health as well, which I feel as if there should be an excused absent for mental health if there's going to be an excused absent for physical health. Thank you.
Very much. Senator Office.
Before they leave, this is a topic overall, mental health in schools, both for students and teachers, that we need to address a lot more. We've talked about it over the last couple of years on the committee, and moving forward, I think we need to work on it. So this is one piece of legislation, but we'd invite you to work with us and come back and chat with us about other ideas you might have that we can do to help. Okay, thank you. And we appreciate having you here today.
Let me ask you, to your knowledge, when there is a mental health issue in the schools, where does the student go? Do you wind up talking to people at the local mental health center? Is the school provide something? How does that work when there is, and particularly older adolescence is sometimes when some of the really serious mental illnesses first manifest themselves. Do you know where you would turn if you needed some help?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At schools, they have school counselors that you can go to. I personally turn to my parents often, but the school offers school counselors.
Okay, the school has school counselors,
Yep.
and they can direct you.
Mhm.
And you're fortunate to have a good set of parents you can turn to.
Yep.
Unfortunately, not everybody has quite got that. Okay? Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I do. Well, for our school counselors, they're not really allowed to talk about it as much. So I think that we could bring in another school counselor that is allowed to talk about it and recognizes our mental health a little bit more and takes it into consideration.
So this is a conversation I had a few days ago, was what students would be comfortable with or most comfortable with in terms of whom you would want to reach out to or what resources you'd want to have available. And one of the ideas under discussion was we have mental telehealth. So in other words, like a one-on-one Zoom session kind of thing with somebody. And none of us really like Zoom sessions, particularly at this point in time. We kind of like in real life better. But it seemed to me that with students being comfortable with their cell phones, their computers, that if you had somebody that was a professional, mental health professional, available through telehealth, where you could just pick up an app and talk to somebody, FaceTime or whatever the case may be, that might be something that students would appreciate. Again, it would be very anonymous, and you'd always have someone available, almost like 24/7. That kind of thing exists. What would your thoughts be on something like that? Is that something you'd feel comfortable using? Is that something you'd want face-to-face in person more? What are your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I personally do telehealth for my counseling sessions. While I do think it helps, you get a lot more while it's in person.
I think you do get a lot more while you're in person, just because I think they understand more of what you're feeling than it is over the phone.
We hope this has worked for you, because you're a chance for us to talk to the real people we're interested in the schools. So thank you very much for coming. Okay, anybody else? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Chairman, thank you for letting those students come in and talk today. I am Andy McKinney. I'm representing myself as well. I've been in education for 14 years. I'm a health teacher, not affiliated with any district at this point. Mental health is a humongous issue, and it's getting worse and worse. And in the last 5 years, I think it's escalated. And teaching is kind of on the back burner when it comes to trying to help these kids through this stuff. There's no point in me teaching any type of curriculum if the kids are dealing with mental health issues that they have a problem with. The bill that has been presented, I think will be kind of an enlightening thing for these kids and reduce the stigma of, I have a mental health issue, I need to deal with it. And it'll also kind of help educators and the counselors earmark the kids that they need to talk to. And I think some kids, there's been discussion about some kids using it just as a cop-out, but those few kids that would use it as that, compared to the kids that we've been helping, would be huge. And going to the telehealth, as you talk to the girls, I think our biggest issue with students is the stigma of, I have a problem and I need help with it, and they don't want to tell anybody about it. And we have very, very limited counselors in all schools, and I've worked in 5 school districts. And those counselors are tasked with getting students to college, doing online school, also doing schedules, and then talking to students. So I think they're way overloaded as far as being able to actually address the mental health issues. Thank you.
Maybe any questions? Senator
Mr.
Brennan.
Chairman, if I may, just kind of follow up with what Senator Rothfuss has asked the girls. What other things do you see as kind of solutions that we could have to this huge problem?
Thank you, Chairman. Senator Brennan, the telehealth I think would help. I mean, some kids are going to want to do it, and I think it gives us a way to just at least open up the door and for them to talk to somebody. I know that in the suicide prevention, you can make a call, or you can text, or you can email, right? And so that has really opened up the door for kids not to feel like they have to go talk to somebody or feel embarrassed about it. And so I think the more options we give students to find ways to help is the better option.
Okay. Further? Okay, thank you very much, appreciate it. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, closed testimony, do I hear a motion? Motion is due pass. I haven't heard any amendments. Mr. Chairman. Senator Office.
I would move to amend on page 3, line 12, change July to December. Page 3, line 17, change July to December.
Okay, those amendments that were requested. Everybody understand what we're doing? You heard the discussion earlier. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carried. Anything further? Anything further? Okay, motion is due pass as amended. Call the roll, please.
Senator Beitman? Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss? Senator Steinmetz? Chairman Scott?
Aye.
5 ayes.
That one passed. It may be in the floor relatively quickly. So, and heck, we're at 9 o'clock. I didn't put the third bill that we had, personal bill up, because I thought these might take more time than they did. Those of you who are new chairman, one of the most difficult things the chairman has to do is predict how long something's going to take, and it's very difficult. So, okay, we're done. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I don't know what